Thank you for being here at the final session of Coalesce Sydney for this year. My name's Joel. I'm a Senior Developer Experience Advocate at DBT Labs, which is a fancy way of saying that I have very specific opinions about what you should be doing with your DBT project, and I'm here to pitch those to you for today. So what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about CI, continuous integration. We're going to talk about what it is, why you should be using it, and how it is easier than ever to get that up and going. So we're going to start off with a little bit of a history lesson on how we got to this point and what is CI and why would you want it. So imagine you've got a DAG that looks sort of like this one, and imagine that you make a change to it. And 10 years ago, you might have just pushed this out into production and just crossed your fingers and hoped that it'd probably work. And that's what, so before I used DBT, we did our reporting on SQL Server, and we just queried the production database, and it was all done through stored procs, and if we changed a report, we would do our best, like we'd write a query, we'd convert it to a stored proc, we'd run it on the test database, which was always out of date, and we'd then copy that over to the production database, and then very, very quickly go and refresh the report, and if it gave an error, then we'd roll it back. Not good. No one wants to do this. And so around about 2016, Tristan wrote what's now become the DBT viewpoint, which is that analytics code is code, and it needs to be treated like that. And so this was very much like a bold claim, and so I've got my classic innovation adoption curve. There was not a lot of people doing this, and the people who were doing it were working it out as they went. And how this actually gets implemented, if we have a look at this, is you've got your Git repo, which contains all of your code. We're skipping ahead to the part where people have suddenly accepted that their analytics code should live in a Git repo, but you've got your main branch, and over time you want to make changes. You branch those off. Each of them gets on its own branch, which queries your development database, and then you go into PRs, which are the yellow ones down the bottom that are your staging database, and all of those are reading from the same true data set that you're actually going to be running against once it gets merged back in. And if we drill into the yellow section a little bit, this is basically what that looks like, is that you've got your, you open a PR, this is the DBT Cloud Flow. The same sort of things work in DBT Core, but you've got to do a bit more heavy lifting yourself. But you have your GitHub or your GitLab or Azure DevOps kicks off a trigger to DBT, which starts a run, and it will build the it'll build your project into its own schema. And that keeps everything segmented out of the way, off the critical path. You're not going to accidentally impact your production assets. And then you can run those tests, you can validate that all of your data is in a good state, and if it passes, then it can go for review by your colleagues. If it fails, you go back and you fix it. But you do all of this without messing with either other colleagues who are doing their own development work, or people who are depending on production data sets. And then once that's done, you merge it back into your main branch, and you're away laughing. And so this is what we did at my old job, Education Perfect. We had a little project in 2020, and it took us about 10 minutes to run the entire project from start to finish. And so we just did that, and it was great. We knew that we were no longer going to release something and then get bitten by a nasty surprise. But then we kept building out our project, and it got bigger and bigger, and it started that running the entire project from where to go started to take more like an hour. And you can't wait an hour to see whether changing a line of code has got an unexpected bad outcome. And so around about this time was when we discovered something called Slim CI. And so we're going to talk a bit more about what that is in a minute, but this was a new way of doing CI that came out in 2021 or so. But we're going to zoom forward a little bit further to today, where there's a lot of people running CI, there's a lot of people running Slim CI, but those two arrows are not touching, and the point of this talk is to make them touch. There is no reason to be running CI and not be doing Slim CI. And with that said, I now want to talk about what that actually is. So SlimCI is a wrapper over state. And so if we go back and look at our DAG from earlier, we've changed it. The thing is that when you do a DBT run, DBT has not a single clue whether it's the first time it's being run or the 1000th time or the millionth. It just shows up and says, right, you want me to make all these tables. They're all going to be create or replace view, create or replace table, create schema if not exists. It's all completely idempotent, which is great because it means that you can blow away your dev schema, you can blow away your production schema if you want to, and you can rebuild everything, and you know that there's no weird stateful artifacts of like, we had this table and then we changed it, and you need to remember that if you're going to do it again, you need to run your alter table command. You don't have to worry about any of that, which is normally great, except for this case where you want to actually give DBT a little bit of state so that it doesn't have to start from scratch every time. So we are giving DBT a little bit of state. And what this means is that we are going to be, first off, we're using deferral. So deferral is a way that when you have your ref be resolved, if DBT can't find the table in your development schema, then it will go and get it from your prod schema. And that means that you don't have to have built everything upstream of that modified node. You can skip straight ahead to just testing the stuff that's changed, which is really efficient for compute costs, really efficient for time, really efficient for everything that you would want to be efficient with. And the way we do that in practice is you've got your DBT build command and you just pass that defer flag and a state flag. Again, if you're using cloud, then you don't actually have to pass those flags, it will do it for you. But if you're doing core and you've got these artifacts, it's just the run artifacts from your previous DBT run. And so in cloud, you've got that drop down, you just say defer to the production run. And that means that whatever the most recent successful job was that ran in your production environment, we will use those artifacts to resolve the refs for anything that doesn't exist. So we're back to our old friend this DAG, and the thing is that if we just did a DBT build with that defer and that state flag passed, we would still build everything. And the reason for that is that we only need to defer if we haven't got that already existent. And since we're building from scratch, we're going to build everything. So the other part of a SlimCI build is that we need to add in this state modified selector. And this compares the code as it is right now with the code in the comparison manifest. And if those have changed, if anything is not the same, then DBT will include that in your selector, which is almost right, except that you might have no problems in this green node that's been modified directly, but what if you've removed something or you've changed, you've renamed something and there's an impact on a downstream node? So what we actually want is to whack a plus on the end of that. And this now means that we are picking not only the modified node, but anything that depends on it, and we're going to, anything that is not in that red box, we're just going to use the prod version of, because that's the same as what is in dev anyway, so we just don't need to not bother building it. So that's the first part. I want to talk a little bit about, I'll go back if you want to take the photo. These slides will be made available, of course, as well. I want to talk a little bit about DBT Clone, which is a new piece of functionality which is in DBT 1.7 and makes it a lot easier to do incremental validation as well. So incremental models are not normally built from scratch. That's their whole shtick, is that you have a big model that's too slow and too expensive to compute from scratch every time. And I just said that CI builds happen in a brand new schema where nothing exists. And so that meant that, for our internal analytics project, we actually, before this, we used to build our incremental models twice in CI, because we'd build them once to check the from scratch path, and so that we could get the actual table built so that we could check that the incremental logic worked correctly, because that's what's actually getting run. And that sucked. That was not good. So what we do now is DBT Clone lets us set up a zero copy clone in Snowflake, same sort of behavior in Databricks and BigQuery, and We pass it the state artifacts to get the information on where we're going to look for those tables, but it will just wrap around all of the logistics of making a copy of that table. And it's useful for a bunch of stuff like blue-green deployments, but in this case what we're using it for is to get the incremental logic testing into a good state. And what that looks like, you could put this in like a YAML selector because it's a little bit of a mouthful, but basically what it looks like is you want to build you put this in front of your standard DBT build modified models command, and you would clone any pre-existing incremental models that themselves have been modified or that are downstream of a modified model. And then you could optionally pass a full refresh flag, you could optionally pass a threads flag. Full refresh definitely do. It doesn't cost anything to just clone that again and just to drop it and recreate it. And again, we like idempotency around here. The threads, probably not useful for a CI run, but I mention it just so that it's on your radar that these do not have to run in DAG order because they are just doing a clone. You can do it like 50 at a time and blitz through them. You're really only limited by what your warehouse will let you do. So that's a little sidebar before we go into how does DBT Cloud make the whole CI experience easier with the releases we've made this year. So first off, we covered this in the keynote briefly, but there's a new CI job type, which means that we actually can put smart defaults in. We know what you're trying to do. One of the big problems with CI historically, and one of the reasons that it was something that you had to do a little bit of a dance to get going, and so it was not super easy to get absolutely right, was that you had to go in and get that node selection command just right. You had to get your deferral just right, and now that's all just set for you correctly by default. One of the other things that we've changed in the last month or so is that you can now run CI runs for different PRs concurrently. They don't consume run slots. They can run infinitely many of them, which was a problem where if you had like 5 people putting out a change set at once, then they would all have to get in a queue. They don't anymore. They can all run independently. And if one of those people commits a change while there's another PR build in flight, then that stale code will get cancelled. So again, this is a big focus on efficient use of resources, that we don't need to finish building just to toss that out and start building a new thing. We can skip that straight away. So if you commit partway through a build, you don't need to worry about managing that by hand anymore. Some people like to have their CI runs all be only marked as non-draft when they're ready for an actual human. You can do that now too. That's a one-liner. That's easy. But let's have a look at what this all looks like from start to finish. So I've got a video that I prepared earlier because I did not want to have to babysit a laptop. That we're going to come in here, and we've got these 2 new jobs that we talked about. So the deploy job is the same one that you know and love, and then the continuous integration job is what gets triggered either by your Git provider, or you can trigger it with an API call if you want, and we'll have a look at that in a minute. But what I want you to see in this video is that the only thing we're going to change here is the job name and the job description. Everything else is sensible defaults that will get you as far as you need to go for day 1. But we are going to go through and have a look at the other things that we've got. These triggers, so this is the toggle I was talking about, where it'll either run based on your Git provider, or if you want to run it yourself, you can. And then we've got that draft pull request box that we just talked about as well. You've got the sensible defaults in terms of what you're going to build. You might want to add a clone command in there over time, but again, for day 1, that's going to be fine. Deferring to production, you can do as long as you've got your production environment tag, that's that blue tag, and that's it. You can now set that up in a couple of minutes, and you don't have to spend a lot of brain time worrying about have you got every button ticked just right. We'll quickly look at the API trigger as well, just to see what's here. We've got pre-provided for you the account ID, the job ID. You just copy that example request and whack your own API token in, and you're sorted. So what does this look like as a developer on the other side? You're going to have people go in here, and run the IDE. We're going to create a new branch. And then what we're going to do is we're going to edit one of our models to remove a column. So we're in the dim wizards model right now, and we want to get rid of phone numbers. And you can see down the bottom there's the little DAG. Once we've got this committed, so we've got this DAG here containing dim wizards, which is the one we've modified, and then downstream of that is fact orders, and those are the only two that are going to get built, because those other models, there's the two sources on the far left, and then there's the staging models in the middle. Those aren't going to be built, they're just going to be deferred to. So we'll come over to GitHub, we'll create that issue. Someone's getting a phone call. And in a moment, DBT Cloud will kick off a run, and we can click through to see what that run is doing. We can see the results be streamed back to us immediately. And what we'll see here is, first thing is that there are only those two nodes that have run. You'll also see that the schema name has been overridden to DBT Cloud PR, and then the account ID and the request ID. And you'll see that the fact orders table has failed because it actually also depended on that column that's just been deleted. So if we just YOLO'd this out into production, we'd be having a really bad afternoon in a little bit. But what we're going to do instead is we are going to go back and have a look at our GitHub tab. And while that happens, I'm just going to get a glass of water. Okay, so we can't move this forward because the job failed, and we've got our branch protection rules set up to say that we can't merge until the CI check has succeeded. So we're going to pop back into the Develop tab, and we're going to fix up that column that's gone missing from fact orders as well. So we'll have a look at that in the DAG down the bottom and click into that. And then we can delete this. And while we wait for that, I think we can also talk a little bit about how this works in a cloud CLI world as well. So the exact same behavior, you'd get to see where you're building locally, and then you push it up. And this will all still run with the same environment configuration. Cool, okay, so this run is now underway again, and we'll click through to it, and we'll see that it has succeeded, and then we can merge that code quite happily, and we can feel confident that everything that needed to happen has happened. Cool, okay, so that's what that looks like. I do have some other closing offerings of just a grab bag of things that could be like a 5-minute section on their own, but we all want to go and have happy hour, so instead they're 30 seconds apiece. Okay, so this one is not for everyone, but this is something that we did have. I remember I talked earlier about how we would build our incremental models. We were not obviously building the entire incremental model of every DBT invocation ever from scratch, because it would take like 10 years. What we did instead was we had this limit in dev macro, which if you are more concerned about speed than 100% accuracy of knowing that every single row in your table is going to run successfully, then you can put some logic like this in where you pick a subset of your data to check the shape of the table more so than the exact contents of every piece of data. You can materialize all your tables as views in CI and test environments, because one of the main reasons you'd use a table is to prepay the computation costs, and then you'll have speedy reads later on. These tables are not going to live long enough for that to pay off. So this is something that I used to do to get our build times down quite a lot, was to say, we're not going to have these live long enough, we're just going to build them as views, and then we're going to drop them. Something that I've got very into this year, I've always used warn error in especially in like the DBT seed step or somewhere, just to validate that if you have, I don't like to have warnings showing up in my projects because warnings today are errors tomorrow, and or worse, there's a error that comes up, especially when you're refactoring a lot of your project. You might rearrange some of your folder structures, and if you've got logic defined in your dbt project.yaml for resources at this folder path should be configured one way or another, if you move those folders and they don't exist anymore, then DBT will just give you a warning saying, hey, just so you know, you're trying to configure something that doesn't exist. And that, in a CI context, is actually really bad news. So I like to escalate those up to errors, but there are some errors or some warnings that you don't want to include, and that's where warn error options comes in. You can set this as an environment variable to exclude the ones where there's nothing to do or there's nothing returned from the selection criteria, and that would happen when you were doing a state modified and there hadn't been any modifications. For example, if you hadn't changed your seeds, then a DBT seed which selects modified nodes only would return one of those two warnings, and that's not actually correct to escalate to an error, so I exclude those. The other thing you can do is you can try the DBT Project Evaluator package. There's parts of this that are coming into DBT Explorer that we talked about earlier today. There's a lot of the logic and the warnings and the recommendations are going to be made available to you from inside of DBT Explorer, but you can also put them in a CI context. And what this will do is this was built by the DBT Labs professional services team who have fixed more DBT projects than anyone in the world probably, and they've taken all of their learnings and all of their battle scars and they've put that all into a package that you can run for yourself, and it will warn you if you don't have tests on your primary keys, if you've got models that are undocumented, if you're querying a source directly instead of putting a staging layer over the top of it, if you're querying it in lots of different places, all these things that are like good hygiene for your project, you can actually enforce programmatically through CI. But again, I just want to reiterate that these are like things that you do after you've got the baseline up and running. The other thing you can do is you can talk to Michelle at Happy Hour. Michelle, stand up and wave for us. You may remember Michelle from 6 hours ago at the keynote. She opened a discussion on GitHub 2 years ago. 2 discussions. She's opened 2 discussions about unit testing and is going to make it happen in 1.8. Yeah, it's coming. Unit testing is coming to DBT. If you care about unit testing, then you should talk to Michelle because she's really smart. And that's where the next round of innovation is coming in. All right, let's recap. CI, it's good for you. That's it. It makes sure that you don't release dumb changes by mistake. It's not niche anymore. If you're not using it, the time to start is now. It's really easy in DBT Cloud, and once you've got those basics implemented, do the other things, but just do the basics first, please. Thank you. Or you can catch me at the happy hour. We are down at the far end where the booths are and where we've been eating all day. I imagine that people would rather chat to me. Oh no, we've got a hand up. Lay it on me. Sure. So the question was, you can do full CI or slim CI. When would you do one or the other? Or when would you do both? Yeah. So full CI is possibly something I would rebrand to wasteful CI. So slim CI is a way of building only the models and that have changed in your project since your last production run. And so doing the full build of every single node in your project is not something you should really ever need to do because those have already succeeded in the past, and so you don't need to revalidate them. You only need to check things that have changed in your PR. And so I would say that slim CI is the right way to do all of your CI. Yeah. 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 No, you. Yeah. So you are exactly my target audience for this presentation, and I thank you for now going back and talking to your team and telling them that Joel said to cut it out. No, this is great. I think one thing that we notice is that there's a pretty strong correlation in CI uptake between like based on the size of your project. Like as your project gets larger, you are more likely to have CI in place, and that's like makes some sort of logical sense that your project gets bigger, your team is bigger, you need more guardrails in place. But it is actually equally as important for a data team of one to have some CI in place because you don't have anyone to run your code reviews. You want to spend time not worrying about surprises, and that's what CI does. Is you are guaranteed that every time you define your rules once and then they're enforced for you every time instead of hoping that every colleague or even just you yourself is going to get everything done exactly right the exact same way every time. So regardless of the size of your project, go home and turn on some CI. But for now, let's go have a drink.